If you've ever sat down at a table ready to play a role-playing game of any variety, you have likely encountered one of these little buggers. Or maybe hundreds of these little buggers. This is a goblin, and goblins go hand in hand with D&D, so much so that the game may as well be called Goblins and Dragons. Goblins have gained a near cult following and are widely loved by the community, and let's be honest, who wouldn't love these little rascals? Wait, no, not that! They have been a part of every single edition of Dungeons & Dragons since its inception, and while they have earned their spot as a favorite amongst the community, they kinda suck. So today, we're taking a look at the Goblin stat block, talking about why they suck, and making them better so they can become the true apex predators they were meant to be in your next D&D campaign. Goblins are... well, they're mischievous little shits. In order to make them more threatening, let's take a look at their description to see what kind of inspiration we can pull from it. The first line we see here is that goblins are small, black-hearted humanoids that lair in despoiled dungeons and other dismal settings. Individually weak, they gather in large numbers to torment other creatures. While they aren't necessarily really dangerous alone, the power of goblins come from their numbers rather than their individual strength. The thing is, though, that you never encounter a goblin alone. Chances are, if you find one goblin, there are 15 hiding just behind that tree over there. And not just other goblins, but possibly other creatures like rats or wolves as well. So let's take that and make some fun goblins. Since the main thing about goblins is that there's just a lot of them, let's make 4 different stat blocks, being the Goblin Brawler, the Goblin Rat Tamer, the Goblin Wolf Rider, and the Big Gaboss. Each of these different goblins will focus on different areas, with the Goblin Brawler focusing on different abilities based upon the weapon that they're wielding. The Goblin Rat Tamer and Wolf Riders will have abilities obviously tied around their preferred companions. And the Big Gaboss will be the leader of this ragtag crew with their own unique abilities fitting of the Big Gaboss. Each of these goblins are going to have their own unique stats, but I'm just going to focus on the abilities for now and see what we can do to make combat fun. Starting with the Brawler, let's say that they can wield either a battle axe, 2 daggers, and for fun a halberd, because seeing a tiny goblin with a halberd is just too funny to not include. Each of these types of brawlers have different abilities based on their chosen weapon. Thinking of a battle axe, I think of a large chunk of damage. So with that in mind, let's keep with the silly theme of goblins and call their attack Ka-Chunk. It can deal some damage and lacerate a target for some extra damage over time. Something like 1d8 plus 2 slashing damage, and then an additional 1d4 continual bleed damage until they end the effect with a saving throw. And boom! Like that, we already have a much more engaging and fun goblin. But now for the dagger goblin, the first thing that comes to my mind is an angry little creature stabbing at someone's legs. So let's give them a stabby ability, which is really just a funny name for multi-attack, which allows them to make 2 pointy poke dagger attacks. Since they get 2 attacks, the damage for each will only be 1d4 plus 2 piercing damage. But if both attacks hit the same target, then a creature's movement speed is reduced by 10 feet until the end of their next turn. My thought process here is kind of like a little toddler hitting someone's legs, and it would likely slow that person down, so just imagine giving that toddler daggers and the visual makes a lot more sense. Don't give toddlers daggers. You heard it here first, folks. But now we move on to the Halberd Goblin Brawler. The Halberd is too big for this guy, but he doesn't care because he really wants to poke stuff. So we'll give him the Poke and Prod attack with a 10-foot range, which deals 1d10 plus 2 slashing damage, or piercing damage. But we also want to give him another ability that plays into the whole halberd being too big for him. We can give him an ability and name it something like Dizzying Spin, where he spins in an uncontrollable circle and this unwieldy halberd just damages all creatures around him. But after using this ability, the goblin becomes dizzy and all attacks against them now have advantage until the start of their next turn. So while it might be a very powerful variant of an ability for a goblin, it definitely has some massive downsides. But I think those are some really fun variants of a typical goblin. But now let's get to the specialist goblin stat blocks. When I say the words Goblin Rat Tamer, what comes to mind? Personally, I think of a goblin who literally tosses rats at his enemies and commands them with like a flute, kind of like a goblin rat bard. So with that in mind, the first ability is going to be Rat Toss. The Goblin tosses a rat at a creature within 20 feet, dealing 1d6 plus 2 bludgeoning damage. Any creature hit by this attack also takes 1 damage on their subsequent turns, as the rat continues to just kind of bite them. And just because I think it's funny, the more times they're hit with this ability, the more rats and the more damage. But a creature can end this subsequent damage by simply making a dex check at the end of their turn. But for the next ability, we have something that I like to call Toot Toot. The Goblin toots his flute. The Goblin toots his flute in an attempt to distract an enemy. On a failed wisdom saving throw, that creature now has disadvantage on all ability checks until the end of their next turn. Pretty simple, but also really fitting for a Goblin Rat Bard. But finally, the last ability is going to be a bonus action that I call Ankle Biters. The Goblin again toots his flute, commanding all of his rats to swarm a target within 15 feet. That creature must make a dexterity saving throw or become grappled by a swarm of rats until the end of their next turn. And that's the Goblin Rat Tamer. Now, we move on to the absolute chads of the Goblin world with the Goblin Wolf Riders. Don't ask me how goblins were able to tame wolves because I have no idea, but let's just make the stat block and go with it. The creature is technically 2, being a goblin and a wolf, but I simplified it into a single stat block. To start off, we have Feral Pairing, just a fancy name for being able to make 2 attacks per round, with the Wild Slash attack and the Feral Gnash attack. The Goblin wildly slashes towards a creature, dealing 1d8 plus 2 slashing damage, and the Wolf then lashes out at the same creature, dealing 2d4 plus 3 piercing damage. But that's just the basic attack. The fun part of the stat block is going to be a special ability that I called Yeehaw. If the Goblin Wolf Rider moves at least 15 feet towards a target and then hits them with both attacks, they take an additional d6 of damage and must make a strength saving throw or fall prone. Both of these abilities are coupled with higher average hit points and greater movement speed to make the Wolf Rider a decent threat. But finally, we move now onto the big gaboss. This is the big boss of the Goblin squad, and as such, we need to give him some really cool and unique features to prove it. We'll start with the base Goblin boss stat block and add to it with some extra flair. Firstly, the big gaboss gets a multi-attack because, obviously, they're the gaboss. Whenever it takes the attack action, it can make 2 attacks with its scimitar and then use its pocket sand ability. They toss sand at a nearby creature's eye, and that creature must make a DC 14 Constitution saving throw or become blinded. And after that, a creature can make a save at the end of their subsequent turns to end the effect. I know that might not sound cool, but I think it sounds like stereotypical Goblin behavior, especially one smart enough to become the gaboss. Now, when I named this gaboss, I kept thinking of Bob. So naturally, my mind will not let me make the gaboss without including some sort of explosive ability. So that's why I named the next ability Kablammy. Once per combat, the big gaboss can toss an explosive at a location within 30 feet, and creatures within 10 feet of the Kablammy take 2d8 bludgeoning damage and 2d8 fire damage, or half as much on a successful save. I don't know why my brain works this way, but it does just feel right giving the gaboss an explosive. But the final ability I gave the gaboss was the Gobpile. Pile. This is a bonus action where the gaboss points at a creature within 30 feet and directs all goblins' attention towards that one creature. Any goblin able to immediately uses their reaction to make an attack against that creature with disadvantage. Simple enough, when the gaboss says to do something, you do it. But that's all I added to the gaboss. Like I said earlier in the video, all of these goblins have variations of stats and health, but I didn't really go over those because I really just wanted to focus on unique fun abilities to pull out in your game. If you want specific stats, just start with the base goblins and go from there. But that's it for making goblins better. If you like this video, make sure you leave a comment and let me know. Most of my videos are generally focused around spellcasting, so it was kind of nice to try something a bit different. Also, if you're looking for more ways to enjoy D&D, why not hit that like button and subscribe for more epic spell breakdowns, combos, or maybe a few DM survival tips. Anyways, thank you all very much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.